This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And what I'm looking at today is 2018's Hellraiser Judgment, directed by Gary Tunnicliffe. Gary Tunnicliffe is the special effects artist who worked on many of the Hellraiser sequels, though he's also a director in his own right. And in 2018 he directed Hellraiser Judgment. And this is a surprising movie in a lot of ways. It's one of the better Hellraiser sequels to come down the pike. That's not to say there aren't problems, because there are. That being said, it is still better than most of the other sequels. By my reckoning, part of the problem with Hellraiser Judgment is that it's a repulsive movie. And I don't mean that necessarily in a negative sense. I'm talking about some of the special effects and some of the things that are done revolving around eating and bile. It's a real icky movie at points, and that seems very deliberate. It is something that I don't really enjoy, though, and I would argue no other Hellraiser film is quite like it in that department. Very hard to watch at points, but once again, that's not an accident. It's clear to me that Tunnicliffe intended it to be that way, so I can't hate on him for it. Would I have done it? No. But it's not bad. It's just a different interpretation. And speaking of interpretations, one I don't agree with, though once again, it's not bad, though it veers from typical Hellraiser mythology, and that is the involvement of angels. If you recall any of the Hellraiser films, there's no mention of Christianity. And that's because the Cenobites aren't demons. I believe Pinhead described them as explorers on the edge of sensation, though that might have been the Hell Priest from the reboot. But in any case, they aren't evil. They're just extremes. They have no agenda in that sense. And so they exist outside the Judeo-Christian mythology. But Tunnicliffe brings them back in, moving the franchise in a direction I don't really enjoy, but it's not stagnant either. He's doing interesting things, so I appreciate that. What I don't appreciate is that he doesn't seem to understand the point of the puzzle box. The movie begins with the Auditor, a great Cenobite, by the way. He's very interesting. He has a sense of humor. Dark, admittedly, but a sense of humor nonetheless. And he and Pinhead are discussing new ways to get people to go to hell, I guess? Their version of hell, I should say. They don't call it hell. There's much ado made of the puzzle box being dated and people moving on to more modern ways to get their thrill. This idea does not make sense within the mythos of Hellraiser. The point of the lament configuration is exactly that it doesn't attract everyone. By way of analogy, the lament configuration is like a gourmet, expensive meal at the most exclusive restaurant. Most people, in fact, will not be able to partake of it, but you will have a certain clientele that will. That's the point of the lament configuration. It's trying to get people to buy into it, and it doesn't want everybody. That's the whole point of it. It's extremely exclusive, in fact. By the way, I should also mention that this is why the Cenobites aren't evil in and of themselves. You come of your own accord. They don't drag you down. They don't seek you. You come to them. That's why the people who will be involved with such things are very rare, and it doesn't happen often. And in fact, if you recall Tony Randell's Hellraiser 2 Hellbound, we come to learn that the Chatterer was a child. So he more than likely didn't seek out the puzzle box, more so than he probably stumbled upon it, and it took him. This is my entire point, which Hellraiser Judgment doesn't seem to either understand or ignore. Namely, you don't want everybody. You're not trying to gather as many followers, adherents as you can. You want the cream of the crop. You want those people who are searching for the most unique, the most novel experience. Those are the ones you want to catch. So the entire approach of Hellraiser Judgment within the context of the Hellraiser films, including Barker's original, makes no sense. This bothers me more than any of the other things that happen in the movie. It's kind of frustrating. And another thing that's not great, though it's acceptable, it's that apparently Gary Tunnicliffe really likes David Fincher's Seven. I mention this because the story with the homicide detectives is all Seven. And that's okay. But it feels very derivative. It's Seven not done as well, which is why you don't do that. If you can't bring more to the table, if you can't one-up Seven, a great movie by the way, don't make your movie so evocative of it, it feels like a knockoff. That really bugged me because it was distracting. Though as I mentioned, this is one of the better Hellraiser sequels. A thing in its favor is that in many of the Hellraiser sequels, Pinhead is essentially a cameo. He pops up, but the story is never really about what the Cenobites are doing per se. It's other people doing things with the Cenobites entering the picture at some point. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, and it plays almost like an anthology, which is fine, but it gets kind of repetitive because, as I said, way too many of the sequels are like that. It's the same idea. The Cenobites are always afterthoughts. It kind of bugs me, though that's not what happens in Gary Tunnicliffe's movie. It establishes what they're trying to do, and as I said, I don't necessarily agree with it, but it does. And it lays it out clearly, and the events of the people in the movie kind of meet at a point with the Cenobites' goals. It's an effective framing device. I think it works pretty well. Despite the fact that the movie deals with these three detectives primarily solving a series of murders, I should say, by someone known as the Preceptor, you never really get to know them. They don't feel real. They feel like characters in a script. That's not great, especially when you take into account that Gary Tunnicliffe wrote as well as directed this movie. If we were able to better relate to them, I think the movie would have worked better. Something that does work pretty well, though, is that Gary Tunnicliffe seems to use his budget well. If you're familiar with the bulk of the Hellraiser sequels, they don't tend to have a lot of money invested in them. This is why I think the Cenobites turn up relatively infrequently in them. They just don't have the money to maintain it. Hellraiser Judgment, despite not having a lot of money, is very atmospheric, and he seems to be able to do a lot with less. In terms of sets, there are not a lot of them, and they're not terribly elaborate, but they're photographed in such a way that they look more effective than they really are. It's kind of a feat, to be totally honest, and it helps the movie work well. As I said, the premise does not work, though. The idea that the Cenobites are seeking more people to drag down to their dimension. That doesn't work because it's never been about that. Clive Barker's original is always quality over quantity. You get the most perverse. You get the most mean-spirited. You get the most sensation-seeking person, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. But that being said, taking into account all those caveats, Hellraiser Judgment is surprisingly effective. It looks good, it's shot very well. Well, there's a lot of shaky cam in instances I don't think it should be there, but that's kind of nitpicking. Overall, Hellraiser Judgment is surprisingly good and pretty effective for a Hellraiser film. Though what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. If you agree, disagree, let me know down below. And as usual, consider like, follow, or